Israel First is mad at you because you're saying, talking about selling for all foreign bonds, and so obviously you've defied Israel, so that's a huge problem for you. We'll talk about how it might be a problem, but first, what are you doing that's got them agitated? Raj Goyal is running for New York State Comptroller, and he's being attacked by Israel First. Of course, why? My guess is he has not pledged to serve Israel loyally while being the comptroller for an American state. But we're gonna find out because Raj is here. Welcome, brother.
Cenk, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. Before we get to the Israel issues, what is a comptroller?
Well, I like to say in Hindi, it's Raj Goyal in New York. So the state comptroller in New York State is one of the most powerful state executive jobs in all of America. And what it does, it's the chief fiscal officer of New York State. And one of the things, Cenk, that we should talk about tonight, which I'm excited to do, is Democrats have let these jobs go. These are very powerful jobs. And even though Republicans are absolutely terrible at managing the economy, they blow budget deficits sky high, still voters give Republicans better marks on managing the economy. One of the reasons is because on the money jobs, we let them go. And we don't really prioritize them. We think of them as paper-pushing backwater offices, when in reality, the New York State Comptroller runs with sole trusteeship a $300 billion pension fund and is the state auditor. Every penny of public dollars in New York State essentially can be audited and investigated for inefficiency, waste, fraud, and abuse by this office. And right now, it's sitting there with a 40-year Albany incumbent who does none of these things. And it's a huge weapon in the war against the affordability crisis that is laying fallow right now.
No, I love what you're saying, Raj, because you're totally right. First of all, money is kind of everything. And so where's our money going? And a huge problem for Democrats, honestly, in places like California have been, hey, we give tons of money to address homelessness or whatever, and then you ask them where to go, and they're like, I don't know. I don't know is not an acceptable answer. And so, and you could do a lot of good in that position. So tell me a little bit about the incumbent. When is the race? Who's the incumbent, and why do you think he's not doing a good job?
So the current incumbent is a guy named Tom DiNapoli, and so he's had the job. He was appointed to it by a speaker of the assembly here in New York, Shelley Silver, who was actually ended up being arrested for corruption and passed away in prison because of those charges. And Tom DiNapoli previously was a 20-year member of the assembly in Albany. So he's been around Albany for 40 years. He prides himself on not using a computer. He had a story in Politico last summer where he said, if you want to email him, you email his assistant and she prints it out for him. And so one of the reasons I mentioned that is that right now we are not in normal times. We need fighters and not folders, as you know. We need people who will stand up to this authoritarian president, who will stand up for the working class of New York State, of America, and say that we're going to use every molecule of power at our disposal to fight for New Yorkers. And when I grew up as a brown kid in Kansas in the 80s, reading everything I could about the Democratic Party, imbibing everything about Roosevelt and Kennedy and Johnson, and I was very, very up to speed on the civil rights movement. That's why I ended up being a civil rights lawyer when I was right out of law school. What I understood, Cenk, about the Democratic Party was that there was one central core thesis, which was obtain political power and use it to help people. That's why Lyndon Johnson sacrificed a 50-year Democratic coalition to do the right thing on voting rights and on civil rights. That Democratic Party is what I think the moment that we're in America is. The internal fight within the Democratic Party is about that dividing line. And the reason I'm running is that this office is, as I said, a very powerful tool, a huge multi-headed weapon to fight for New Yorkers, and nothing is being done right now on that front.
Yeah, and not only do you have those old incumbents who are not doing anything, how could you be a comptroller without using a computer? It's ludicrous. Everything's on a spreadsheet. It's ludicrous not to use a computer. But so that's part of the problem. The second problem is that they're usually the suckers at the table. So if you, for example, know the history of the 2008 crash, or if you just read The Big Short or watched the movie, you know that the state pension funds were the ones that were taken advantage of because they feel like, oh, that's unsophisticated people, and it's easier to rob the taxpayers because they put in incompetent people who don't do anything and just follow orders. And then there's a third problem of who do they actually serve, right? So,
Cenk, if I could, that comment you're making, I'd love to riff on that, because what I have found when I was in the private sector, I started a company when I was 40 and we successfully sold it. It was rooting out waste and fraud and corporate budgets. So I know about the way the Wall Street is wired. And whenever there is complexity and whenever there is a layers of like obfuscation, watch your wallet. Because that's exactly what you're getting at, because they pull the wool over people's eyes. One of the most important consumer issues out there is just truth and invoicing. One of the things that, if you ever looked at your Con Ed bill or the Verizon bill, you need to it's like in hieroglyphics. There's a charge here, and then it's sometimes in arrears, and it's just very complicated. And so when there is complication and complexity, there is often theft going on, where there is money moving from your pocket that shouldn't be moving out of your pocket. And that is one of the things I've learned in the business world.
Yeah, I mean, look, Raj has a really interesting background. He ran that business, sold it. He went to Harvard Law School. He was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, public citizen, ACLU, Center for American Progress, and was a state rep in Kansas, actually. I'm gonna come back to that in a second. But so Israel First is mad at you because you're saying, talking about selling for all foreign bonds, and so obviously you've defied Israel, so that's a huge problem for you. We'll talk about how it might be a problem, but first, what are you doing that's got them agitated or proposing?
So Cenk, all that I said was very simple, which is I was looking at, I've had a lot of conversations. People asked about this issue. I'm running for state comptroller to lower utility bills, to provide affordable housing, to provide childcare, to help the affordability agenda. But also there is this issue of the foreign bond portfolio. So out of a $300 billion pension fund, there are $350 million in the state of Israel in foreign bonds, and about $230 million in all the rest of the world combined. And I said very simply, we should cancel the foreign bond program and bring the money home to New York. We should be investing in New York and New Yorkers. That is the fundamental premise of good money management, of the fiduciary duty that we all have as comptroller, because it is actually political favoritism right now with that program. And so that's what we should end. And of course, we have the moral argument, which is right now, public dollars are going as a blank check to war crimes going on in Gaza. Now, I have been very, very clear. We can hold two things in truth at once, which is October 7th was a heinous war crime perpetrated by Hamas. Horrifying things. We shouldn't shy away from that one bit. But we should also say that we can criticize and hold accountable the government of Israel for its actions and its current right-wing leader. And so that's why the moral thing to do and the fiduciary common sense thing to do is to cancel this foreign bond program.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about foreign bonds. So what is the New York pension fund buys them and gets a return?
That's right.
And is it a good return? How does it help New York and how does it help Israel?
Yeah, so it's a very mediocre return. It is not some sort of incredibly great deal with upside. It is a fair to middling deal. And so, as I said before, what we could be investing in with that money is bonds right here in New York. We could absolutely, the current comptroller dismisses the idea, it makes my blood boil, that we shouldn't invest in affordable housing, that we shouldn't help the pensioners and the people of New York live a better life. We should be investing in things that not only have a better rate of return, because the current comptroller has actually had poor returns. He has underperformed the New York City pension fund. One of the other issues, Cenk, that I talked about is divesting the pension fund from fossil fuels. And I have made that pledge. My opponents have not. And the New York City pension fund executed this and did this, Cenk, and they had better returns than the New York State pension fund. So we have the double whammy here, which is an office asleep at the switch, not responding to the crisis that New Yorkers are facing. New Yorkers having to choose between medicine and housing, between paying their rent and taking their kid to the doctor. We know what's going on out there. And also, we should have more money in the pensioners' back pocket, and we don't.
So you mentioned another interesting fact in there, which is that New York has approximately $350 million in Israeli bonds and 230 million in the rest of the world combined. So if in New York State or New York City has invested so much more into Israel than the rest of the world combined, is Israel's rate of return from their bonds so much better than the rest of the planet that we've favored them in New York City over everyone else?
Yes, I mean, from an obvious perspective, let's be very clear. There is not a money manager on planet Earth that would say if you were constructing a balanced portfolio that you would have this distribution. Nobody could, on its face, nobody could make that argument prima facie. But there is a history to this program, and that history is understood. And so there is a special program for the bonds of Israel. And so what I have said, and what I think many others have said, is that it is time. Life does change. Facts on the ground change. And right now, a program that might have seemed appropriate decades ago no longer does in the world that we're in and what New Yorkers feel. And again, there is a morality argument in which we should not be funding human rights violations. And we should have people who are unafraid to talk about that. And I just got to say, Cenk, on a personal note, this story popped yesterday. I have had some of the most vicious personal texts from dear friends of ours or people I thought were friends, have called me terrible names. Of course, we are political candidates. We're fundraising, and we actually have a deadline in 10 days from now. And it's cost me, quite seriously. And so, but I've made the decision that I have to stand up and do what I think is best for the people of New York, what's best for my fiduciary duty as perhaps the next comptroller of the state of New York, if I have that great honor to have. And in doing so, I know that the flack I'm taking pales in comparison to the affordability crisis that we have out there and the choices that people are having to make. So I made that choice. I'm proud of it. I'm sticking to my position on this because I know it's the right one.
I mean, Raj, last thing on this. I mean, we're actually two quick things on it. One is, like, there is constantly a different rule for Israel. So I often use a Turkish example because I'm Turkish. So if I said like, okay, now the Turkish bonds are less than, other countries, let's say, and I'm sure the Israeli bonds are somewhere in the middle, right? I'm sure there are countries that have lower rates of return and higher rates of return, et cetera. Let's assume the Filipinos, the Brazilians, et cetera, have higher return and low risk. And I go, no. The great majority of our bonds have to be Turkish bonds. People would go, that's strange. And Raj, if you came in and you're like, no, I insist, the rest of the world gets 230 million, but India gets 350 million, people will go, whoa, 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 what are you doing, right? But when it comes to Israel, they reverse it. If you don't give it disproportional to Israel, you're somehow anti-Semitic. Is that not borderline insane?
Well, I'm really glad you raised that, and I want to one fact, and then I want to get to that point, which is Moody's actually downgraded and said the Israel bonds are riskier than they were in the past. So it's another reason from a fiduciary duty perspective that it is not the wisest investment. But to your larger point, Cenk, I'd really love to wade right into there, because at the end of the day, on a very personal note, I understand in all these conversations and thousands of hours and thousands of conversations, I think there is a fundamental dividing line. And I'm 50. I don't look a day over 49, but I'm 50 years old. And I know that for a bunch of folks, and certainly of a certain generation, and some people I love and hold and cherish so close to my wife and I, the criticism of the state of Israel is equivalent and tantamount to anti-Semitism, to their mindset. And I understand where they're coming from. But what I can just say very personally, in the logic that I hold, and looking at it from my head and my heart, I can't cross that bridge. When I look at it, I say, I can love and cherish the Jewish people. I can so vigorously denounce the anti-Jew, the Bondi Beach massacre, which was clearly against Jewish people and was out there to kill Jews. And at the same time, I could hold accountable a foreign state and a military for its actions. We can hold both of these things to be true. And I understand some people, and the people who have sent me very vicious texts in the last 24 hours and so on, they don't believe that. They believe that to criticize the state of Israel is to be anti-Semitic. And that is just a dividing line where I think obviously reasonable people have to disagree.
Yeah, I actually don't think they're reasonable people. I know tons of people like that too. And no, they're wrong. Sorry, like they call us names all the time. I think they're bigots. I think they're racist. And I think that they think that killing Palestinians is no big deal. They think that only Israeli lives matter. And no, none of us are anti-Semitic. It's absurd. Like I would never tolerate anti-Semitism. I would never tolerate Jewish Americans or Jewish New Yorkers being treated different than any other religion. That would be absurd. And by the way, Raj,
100%.
I mean, as immigrants, right? Your family's, I believe, is originally from India, and mine is from Turkey. The very last thing immigrants want is discrimination towards anybody, because we'll be first up, right?
Well, 100%, because one of the things that's most important is to point out that as an American, which is the value and the identity that we hold most dear, I criticize the American government all the time, not just if they're Republicans or Democrats, but if the United States military commits a human rights violation, we call that out. If the government, I'm a proud Indian American, but you can criticize Narendra Modi or any prime minister of India all day long. That is part of the democratic small d process. And so I think that's the new era that we're in. And what I sense just very personally, and I think you know this as well, there is a generational transition going on. This is why we saw right here in New York, we saw with the energy. I was out there at the swearing in for Zoran yesterday. I mean, I think I'm still recovering. They said it was 14 degrees. It felt like negative 15 out there, but it was of course a very joyous day. And what you saw there was, I think what also bothers many people is that many Jewish New Yorkers were running the Zoran campaign. And obviously he did much better with Jewish New Yorkers than a lot of people thought. So we are not only seeing there is not a monolithic view within the Jewish community, but as I said, this dividing line has emerged, in which there are now, I think, a great number of people who realize that a foreign state and a military can be held accountable and evaluated on its own merits, having nothing to do with the fact that we love and cherish our Jewish brothers and sisters.
Yeah, Israel First is now attacking Jewish Americans too. They are calling them self-haters. They're attacking young Jews who voted for Mamdani, on and on, right? Because they're obsessed. They've lost their minds. They're detached from reality. So if I called someone who had criticized Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, an anti-Turkish racist for doing that, everybody would look at me like I have two heads. What do you mean? That's a ludicrous thing to say, right? But they all say it in unison, like honestly deranged people. Criticizing Israel as anti-Semitic, you all hate Jews. You guys sound like lunatics who just escaped from an asylum. I'm not interested in that. Okay, so now, Raj, last thing on this is, you mentioned the tax and stuff. So how else has it affected you personally? Are they saying that they're not going to donate, or that there's going to be consequences?
Look, I literally right before I went on air had a note from a good friend. I thought to be a good friend, who said, he's donating to my opponent, and that he never. And I asked, I said, would you like to talk? He said, no, he wouldn't. He just went off the New York Post article. And so one of the things that I'm grappling with, and of course that's life in the public arena, and I don't shrink from it at all. I embrace this process. I'm very, very excited about this campaign. We're grabbing more momentum by the day, and we're realizing that people in New York and the Democratic Party, they want change. They are now realizing the power of this office, so it's growing by the day. But obviously, I have to say, as a human being, it's not fun to lose friendships and to lose people who you held dear. But I'm going to stick to my position, and I'm going to stand on the principle that I know, which is that I think is best for New Yorkers and for me personally, and the fact that we need a partner, and this new mayor needs a partner in state government to tackle this affordability crisis, and that's the North Star. At the end of the day, we can talk about all these other issues all day long, Jane, but what I care about most is letting New Yorkers live the best life they can. I talked to my good friend today who runs a small business. Her husband runs a small business. She said, there is no relief for me anywhere. My husband's business is about to close. We are barely making ends meet. And these are wonderful people who are very high quality in their profession, and they can't make it here. And they're lifelong New Yorkers. They love New York. They don't want to leave. So that's the issue that we're all grappling with. And that's the North Star of my campaign, and should be the North Star of the state comptroller's office.
Yeah, and by the way, Raj, they were never your friends. So that same thing has happened to me 1,000 times over. And most of my Jewish American friends, the overwhelming majority, are with me and they're worried about what Israel's actions are, and they're real Americans and they're not worried about Israel first, etc. But a small percentage of even people I thought were friends say that I never want to see you again because you've betrayed Israel. Well, so then that means you weren't a friend. I was your token Muslim friend, but only as long as I agreed with Israel. And the minute I didn't agree with Israel, you throw that person away because to you, Israel is more important than a so-called friend or anything else, right? So those people are.
Look, I've learned enough in life, Cenk, that people have their views, and again, I respect where people are coming from. I'm going to stay respectful, and what I believe is standing on principle. Because if we stay in that place, and if we hold our principles dear, and we are clear and authentic and direct and clear about why we're standing on these ideas and why we have these positions, I think the truth will win out, and I think that the people will reward us for that. We saw that with Zoran. We're seeing that in Democratic primaries over and over and over again. They can smell a political opportunist, and right now there is, as I said, no defense really from a common sense fiduciary duty for this program. And one of the biggest issues that I'm campaigning on is electricity bills. The Con Ed bill here in New York City and around the state of New York for all the other utility providers keeps going up and up and up. And you know what I discovered, getting back to where we started, Cenk, in my research and the campaign and so on? The utility companies have become complete tools of Wall Street and financial engineering. And so what we have now is, if you think about a utility company, Cenk, it's supposed to take all the energy we have from planet Earth, take it, spread it out to the most number of people possible at the cheapest rate possible. That's the purpose of a public utility. And right now, the CEO of Con Ed makes $15 million a year. They have financial engineering to get 2x book value on their stock. And it is exactly what's wrong with America in so many places, which we've lost our North Star, which is to help people live better lives. And that's the role of the state comptroller, in my view, and I'm excited to do it.
Okay, I want the audience to really focus on what Raj just said. So look, as we get frustrated with the Israel First crowd demanding that we all discriminate on behalf of Israel, no, they have to get more than the rest of the world combined. It's a blah, 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 et cetera, that lunacy, right? Don't lose track of what this job actually does. And what this job, and what you're saying about the utilities is so important, that a lot of the utilities in many different states are actually among the most powerful organizations at the local level, utilities plus real estate. And because those guys have so much interest in the government, they're the ones who actually give the most amount of donations oftentimes, and politicians serve them. They're much more relevant than Israel on a local level, and for a city like New York. And the fact that you've got your eyes on that and you're gonna try to hold them accountable, that's great to hear and very substantive and terrific. So I'm just giving my opinion on what you said.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and I think the idea here is that, I know the purpose of this show, right, is about how people can make a difference, which is how to organize and how to get engaged. There is this little obscure body in Albany called the Public Service Commission, and it's controlled by Albany insiders, and that is rubber stamping all of these utility rate hikes. We have these AI data centers coming online, and the last thing we need to do is to subsidize big tech. And to be clear, Cenk, I ran a tech company. So again, I know where these bodies are buried. And the last thing we need is to say that Elon Musk or Tim Cook or Jeff Bezos needs to have a data center built to benefit their companies on the backs of ratepayers. But that is precisely what will happen, because again, insiders in the establishment, they want you to not know about this office. They want you to not realize what's going on. They don't want to know about that financial engineering because they like the status quo.
Raj, I was going to start to wrap up the interview, but wait, you said something that's really important there, because about the data centers. Because I've been wondering about this. Are they saying that the data centers should be set up in all these different states, and that the taxpayers should somehow subsidize their frickin' data centers?
It goes this way, Cenk, which is we don't know. So the data centers come into a community. They of course can consume vast amounts of arable land and of water, especially the water issue is becoming an emerging issue. And so what they do is they don't break it out to know. The utility companies say, we have a huge spike in demand, so therefore we need more infrastructure. And they oftentimes do need more infrastructure, but the state comptroller should be the to be the watchdog, the person saying, what do you actually need this for? If you're doing it because the average person needs more hydroelectricity or needs more electricity generally, that's fine. But if you're doing it because Google needs a huge data center to conduct its operations, that's fine, but then Google should pay for it. And right now, there is no way to break into that black box. And I've talked to a lot of people in industry, they don't even oppose that. But the status quo, if they're willing, if they're able to sort of get a sweetheart deal and let it sort of get folded into the normal operational expenses and nobody really knows what's going on, of course they're going to take that deal.
I'll tell you this right now, this is my 2 cents. But if you dive in and you figure out how much the data centers are using the energy and then having the public subsidize it, and you put an end to it, you'll be an American hero. Because these data, no, I'm not anywhere near joking. Because because the oil companies already expect us to subsidize all their costs from climate change and everything else, right? And they just keep pushing all their costs onto us, and that's true of a lot of industries. But these data centers, if they drive up demand and then expect all of us to pay for it, that's a crime. No. You're gonna run a business, you pay your costs, and then you have your revenue, and then you have your profit after that. That's how the free markets work. That's how capitalism works. No, it doesn't work in privatize the profits and socialize the expenses and make the average New Yorker pay for it. Hell no. Well,
and I'll tell you right now, utility companies are entitled to a margin, generally around 9 to 11%. So when I ran my business, that would have been amazing that for every dollar that I spend, I'm just entitled to profit on it, and entitled to margin. So right now, my good friend who's an energy expert, Greg Orman, he talks about this a lot, which is it's the only industry in America where you're paid to decorate your office. What he means is that you go buy that fancy couch or you go buy that fancy ornament for your office, it goes into your asset line and you get margin on that. And so that's what's happened with the financial engineering, not in all sectors of America. I mean, look at private equity getting involved in volunteer fire departments, in owning emergency rooms, and in now owning leagues of high school sports. I mean, it has just gotten beyond anything that we had imagined because of this rampant financialization. So there are many, many goods in this country that are not appropriate for concentrated private equity to come into. And so that's a realization that I think people are waking up to. And I think the AI data center, I agree with you, is one of those great dividing lines, one of those great cleavage points that the average person is sitting around saying, wait a second here, this smells funny and I don't like it.
So I was gonna ask you more questions, but I only have time for one last one.
Sure.
What's the matter with Kansas? No, seriously. No, seriously.
So Tom Frank's a very good friend. And what happened is I was a young guy and I went back to my hometown of Wichita, and very few people go back to Kansas. And I knocked on about 10,000 doors, and I won probably the toughest state house election in the country for the Democratic Party in 2006. I took out a 3-term Republican incumbent, so I know a thing or two about taking out incumbents, and was a down the line pro-choice, pro-labor Democrat in probably the reddest state in America. And then I lost the race for the U.S. House to Mike Pompeo, and I did what every right-thinking person should do. I moved to New York, and I raised my family here. And I know you obviously, as we're fellow immigrants here, Jank, I do want to say before I go, the thing I'm most proud of in my life, aside from politics or business, is that I created a joint family with my wife here in Lower Manhattan. So we moved my parents on our block and my in-laws. So my 2 daughters, who are now ages 16 and 13, were raised with all 4 grandparents. Many of us in the immigrant diaspora, we're not able to do that. I never really met my grandparents because of financial constraints and travel, India in the 70s and the 80s. So that's the thing I'm really, really proud of. And I think there's an emerging issue, Jank, around caretaking. I've now lost my father, very sadly, and my father-in-law. And I don't think we have a vocabulary in America and space around what it's like when you're caring for a loved one who's ill. And so that is an emerging issue. Now, of course, we have universal childcare that is becoming a consensus here in New York. But I think one thing to watch, Jank, if I could suggest, is that over time, we're going to have more and more concern around how we take care of loved ones for people who are in, of course, not only taking care of children, but older parents.
All right, that's a great point too. Raj, how do you say your last name again?
Goyle, like Doyle.
Okay, so everybody check out rajgoyle.com. I believe that's the website.
Yeah, rajgoyle.com.
Okay, And Raj, thanks for joining us. I'm glad to know about your campaign, and I think you've got some really great ideas. Appreciate you joining us today.
Honor to be here. Thank you so much.